Now in this section, we'll talk about some of the other VPN implementations which can provide a virtually a point-to-point or point-to-multipoint connections over internet. Like if I just go back to the basic examples or the basic implementations what we discussed, we have seen some of the dedicated line point-to-point connections where we can have a dedicated point-to-point connections between two different locations over a service provider network, and this WAN connection is given by the service provider. And also we have seen some of the different implementations over frame relay where you can have a point-to-point or point-to-multipoint connections over a frame relay network, which is again one kind of VPN implementation where you have a service provider will be acting as a transit. And also we have seen some of the MPLS networks. In MPLS also we have some customer sites connected over the service provider core MPLS network, and the transit is something provided by the service provider. Now, but the VPNs which we are going to discuss in these sections are going to be implemented over internet. Now here we are going to use an internet as a service provider core, which is allowing you to have a dedicated point-to-point connection between two different sites. Now this transit, core transit, can be an internet or it can be any other service provider network or it can be any other transit. So, but majorly our focus will be on understanding how we can implement a dedicated point-to-point or point-to-multipoint connections virtually over internet. Now we will talk about some of the three different implementations here. Now to provide these virtually point-to-point connections over internet, we can either use a GRE, generic routing encapsulation, or we can also use dynamic multi-point VPNs, and we are going to use some IPsec VPNs. Now these three different implementations we are going to cover in our next coming sections. Now when you talk about GRE, now there are some few major differences between them. Like when we talk about GRE tunnels, GRE is a point-to-point tunnels, and it's not going to encrypt the information. So there's no encryption here, which means your data will go in a clear text, which makes that there is no much security for your information. Now DMVPN is another implementation. It's a somewhat extension to the GRE, which supports point-to-multipoint connections by introducing a concept of multi-point GRE, and also it uses something called NHRP protocol, next hop resolution protocol, which will allow you to have dynamic multi-point connections and identifying the piece. So I'm not getting into details of this. Probably we'll be getting in more in details in a separate dedicated sections we have on only DMVPN covered. Now here I'm just giving you some overview here. Now, whereas when you talk about IPsec VPNs, IPsec Pro VPNs are going to provide some encryption where the first two implementations do not provide. Now we can have our own dedicated WAN connections over internet. Now the basic prerequisite for this is to have a registered public IPs on both the sites. Now one important thing you need to know is we must have some registered public IP addresses on both the sites so that they can identify each other, and you must have reachability between them in order to build your VPN connections over internet. Now which means we need to have source and destinations, and we need to ensure that the source and destination must be reachable between them, and also so that you can also have a public IP address. You must have a public IP address so that they can identify each other on the other side. Now probably first initially we'll start up with the GRE and some of the implementations of GRE, and also we'll discuss some of the drawbacks of the GRE, and then we'll get into some DMVPN implementations, and then in the next section also we'll talk about IPsec VPNs. Now both GRE and DMVPN, they do not provide any encryptions, so there's no encryption implementations, whereas IPsec is going to provide point-to-point connections, and it's going to provide some encryption.